Hey there, welcome to A Time to Thrill. This is your host, Amy Austin. This month, we are featuring USA Today Bestselling Author and entertainment attorney Maggie Marr. She is one of the most mentioned authors and attorneys on this podcast. She's very well known in the author community, and you'll have an opportunity to listen to my conversation with her. I will say that I've been doing a lot of housekeeping this summer. So if you go to aimeaustin.com, I now have links to all the audiobooks actually listed and links to the two new books that came out in the Nicole Long legal thriller series this summer. Outcry Witness, the prequel, Nicole Long's story, and Major Crimes, her first big case as she leads the Major Crime Squad. How are you? As I record this, I'm actually in Budapest enjoying the hot end of the summer in Europe, and I'll be back in Los Angeles soon. It is always interesting. I'm working on the newest Nicole Long book, Without Consent. After that, the next book will be The Murders Began. I'm working actually on them kind of simultaneously. I think it'll be sort of a duet. I have a new character, Blake Hardin Tatum, who is a podcaster. But in the early days of podcasting, like the Mark Maron early days, from the late 2000s. So she is one of the first true crime podcasters out there. And she now has her hand in what's going on in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. It's pretty interesting. It's been super fun to work on something that departs a little bit from Casey Court's life. And that's how it goes. So without further ado, let's get to the conversation with attorney and author Maggie Marr. Hi, and welcome to A Time to Thrill. This month, I'm so delighted to have USA Today bestselling author Maggie Marr on the podcast. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm going to say this. I think that you may be the single most mentioned person on this podcast. It's either you or Becca Syme.
Oh,
And I've already interviewed Becca Syme, so now it's you.
that's a big compliment. So thank you. Yeah,
It
I
is.
appreciate that.
You come up all the time. Every author has mentioned you. So I have like a million questions, which I'm now thinking the podcast should be I have so many questions. But let's start with your new book. So you had a book that came out, oh my God, either this week or last week. I'm very bad with dates. Tell us more about that.
I did. So it's called Books to Film and TV: What Every Author Needs to Know. And this book came about because, well, two things. My background in the entertainment space, selling books into the film and TV world. And then I would originally, when my friends and colleagues figured out that I understood entertainment or authors, they would call me up and we would spend hours just talking about how entertainment works with regards to
Mhm.
books. But as the practice grew, I didn't really have as much time to devote to that. And so I took one of my presentations and the conversations that I had and I put it into this book in hopes that it could become a reference point or a resource guide for authors.
It's a great thing because that's the one question I think I get the most about you. Well, but what does Maggie have to say about X? I'm like, well, you can call Maggie or but now I will just frankly give them this link and then I can do something else. So let's start with there's so many let me think about where I want to start. How is it that you got into entertainment?
it's
Well,
a
it's
it's
the one thing
interesting.
people ask the most about you, I think.
Right. How did I end up here? Well, we can blame it on my husband. Because I really thought that I really wanted to be either a prosecutor or a judge in Cook County after law school, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but I had always been a writer as a kid, but growing up in the Midwest, that didn't really feel like an option as far as a life plan or a job. So I met my husband when I was finishing up my third year of law school, and he was studying environmental biology. Fast forward, and we had moved to Denver for his environmental biology, and he dropped that class and decided he wanted to be an actor. And a year later, he came to me and said, "We have to move to New York or LA." And I said, "LA is warmer and it's cheaper. Let's go to Los Angeles."
That's how
So,
I
yeah,
ended up here. It is cheaper.
right? So it's warmer and cheaper. And
Ooh.
so, as writers and attorneys do, I read every book I could find about entertainment, right? And how
Mhm.
I could transition into that space and be helpful to him. And then quite frankly, because I mean, as a writer, I love being around other creatives. And every book I read sort of told me that I needed to start at an agency, that an agency was like a master's degree in entertainment. So I applied to 2 agencies, and I went through the full interview process with both, and I received offers from both, and I chose, ICM, and I started in the
Okay.
mailroom. And the day I started in the mailroom, there were, I think it was 3 other attorneys and 2 guys with PhDs, and we were all pushing mail cards. Mhm. So
It's so
that's how I got
LA.
my illustrious start, right, in entertainment. Yeah.
It is. And how did you enjoy it? Because I mean, well, you moved up the ranks as one does, but was it other than the mailroom? Because that is what it is. Did you enjoy your time there?
I think, like a lot of things, in hindsight, I enjoyed it a lot more than maybe I thought I did at the time. I came to it after having been a prosecutor in domestic violence and a guardian ad litem, and I had done jury trials and had run my own docket. And I really had this desire to move quickly. I wanted to quickly go from assistant or agent trainee to agent. Um,
Right.
but that was my own personal sort of desire. But I can say I enjoyed it because I learned so much, and so many of those contacts that I made, both in the mailroom and at the agency, are still contacts that I use to this day and lean into to try to get projects sold into the film and TV space.
So when you were okay, so I've known a lot of agents in
Mhm.
LA and all the years I've been here, but you're the only one I know who did book adaptations. Almost everyone I know either represented actors or TV directors or worked in that space. And so,
Mhm.
how did you move into that specific area as opposed to just selling, selling TV pilots or whatever it is?
Right, 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 right. So I was an assistant on a motion picture literary agent's desk, and he became the head of that department. And one of the coordinators for the books to film department was, I think she was leaving, and she came to me and she said, and she knew I loved to read books, and she came to me and said, "Would you ever want to get your promotion in this group?" Because ICM had a dedicated books to film space, in part
Hmm.
because of their very robust publishing or agency arm in New York with regards
Right.
to authors. And I said, "Yeah, I would absolutely be interested in that." So they moved me over there as a coordinator, and I started selling things into the books into the film and TV space from that position. Now, eventually, what's interesting is they moved me back into the motion picture literary space where I was working with
Hmm.
screenplay writers and directors, but they continued to lean into my knowledge base that I had developed with regards to books to film and TV. So I was
Hmm.
put on a lot of creative teams or teams for creatives because of the knowledge of the books that were available at ICM, whether it
Okay.
be directors, screenplay writers, and things like that. Yeah.
And so reading books is always great. Did you ever do coverage for books?
Yes, as an agent trainee, we had to go through the story department. And so
Okay.
they would give us coverage they taught us how to do coverage.
Mhm.
So they would give us coverage to look at. You would read the script and then you would read the coverage, and then they would assign something to it, to you to cover. And so I did learn how to do coverage. I can still do coverage. And um, that that actually is a really interesting question, because I wonder if when I'm reading a book, I'm not inherently leaning into some of those questions that I
Oh, that's so interesting, yes.
right that right that I learned to think about as I was preparing to write coverage.
And I just
Yeah,
realized I should ask you this. Can you explain what coverage is? Because I just realized I
of
shortcut
course.
that whole thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, coverage is basically a script or a book or an article, less likely an article, but a script or a book is handed over to a reader, an official reader, and the reader
Mhm,
reads the entire thing. And then they provide almost like a book report or a synopsis of the
mhm,
book. It lays out what are the primary characters, what is the type of material, a brief sort of overview or synopsis of the plot, readers will give it a recommend or a not recommend. It will all sometimes they'll also rate the writing. They'll rate the
mhm.
marketability, and keeping in mind that that is one reader's opinion. So
Right,
there are some agents that have dedicated readers because those readers really understand what the agent is looking for and what they can say to their reader, this is the type of material that I'm looking for. This is what the market needs.
right.
um, mhm.
And okay, so after reading books that way, are you still sort of reading and selecting projects to work on with that sort of in that same headspace?
Right, yes. There are a lot of people that reach out to me and they want me to try to find a home for their book, and I try to be really, really honest with them about if I read a book and I don't know who the buyer is, then I will turn back to the author and say, "I don't know who this buyer is right now." But inevitably, as I go through the process of and have phone conversations with different executives and buyers in this space, someone may ask for a book that it pings something in my head where I'm like, oh, I just did read that book. So
Mhm.
I guess the caveat should be I don't know who the buyer is for this yet. Right. But
Right.
I don't want to hold out false hope. And I don't want to hold up an author's ability to find someone else that might know exactly who the buyer is.
I know, and there's so many buyers and people's tastes change all the time. It's
Mhm.
true in entertainment, it's also true in publishing. People wake up one day and they want X, and, X does exist, but they didn't want it yesterday. Um,
Mhm.
so it feels like a moving target to judge what people want.
Well, that and then the other thing is that it's my experience that it's very unlikely right now to sell a book directly to a distributor without any sort of packaging or attachments with regards to that book.
Mhm,
It
mhm,
needs to go through a production company that has an overall deal. It needs to have the attachment of either a showrunner or a screenplay writer who has a take. It might need a director or an actor who has meaning in the marketplace. Those things need to be already in place for a Netflix and HBO Max, name any distributor, to pick it up, unless it's a very big book, and by big, I
right.
mean a huge book that we're all aware of, or it's something that the distributor has been looking for and it just hits their sweet spot.
So can I ask you this, because I was talking to some people about this last weekend while I was away. Do you feel that there's a shortage
I found
of
this on the web.
showrun Oh,
That
that's you.
you and I triggered my Siri.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. Um, do you feel that there's a shortage of showrunners right now?
Yes, absolutely. I do feel like there's a shortage of showrunners right now. Um,
Uh,
yeah,
because
because
I was
becoming a
talking
show.
to
Oh,
a
go
couple of
ahead.
showrunners who are feeling,
hmm
I don't wanna say overwhelmed, but overwhelmed. Let's say that.
100%. Because to become a showrunner, can take anywhere from 5 to 8 to 10 years, and some people never become showrunners. It's a very archaic way in which showrunners become showrunners, right?
Mhm.
You start as a writer's assistant, and you work your way up through the room, and then you eventually pitch your own show.
Right.
Um, so you have to have been in the writer's room to be able to run a show. I mean, I use this all the time that even with Queen Sugar, with Ava DuVernay, she had done Selma, and they still put a showrunner on that show for the first year because
Right.
it's such a specific skill set. And what I'm
Yes.
finding is that a lot of showrunners are doing multiple shows and they're supervising people that are just below the ability to be a showrunner, right? Like
That's
they're
yes,
maybe
yes, yes.
supervising multiple shows, which
Mhm.
would stretch a showrunner, you know?
A little thin, this is what I'm hearing.
Mhm. Mhm.
A little thin. They're feeling put upon, but the industry has been very what is the word I want to use? They have not brought up new showrunners at the pace that they would need to, especially given the explosion of um, content creators and
I think
content buyers.
I think it's an opportunity though too for showrunners and for writers who have been positioned just beneath that showrunner sort of title to move
Hmm.
into that role. It's almost as though you have to become more like a Shonda Rhimes. I mean, there's a reason why she's able to have that many shows going or
Right.
that many things on air. And I think some of it is you start to run all your shows from the perspective of being the supervisor of them and the final reader.
Hmm.
It almost becomes its own mini production company.
Well, it's like
But I
David
think,
Kelly, but that's a lot.
yes,
It's a big job. I mean,
yes.
that's a thing.
Hmm.
That's it. It's a hard thing. It's just interesting because well,
It
it's
takes
just
a
because.
huge amount of skill sets. To be
Hmm.
a really good showrunner and especially to supervise multiple shows, you have to understand business. You have to understand numbers. You have to
Budgets, yeah.
understand the creative component, right? And
Hmm.
you have to be really organized. And I think to be really good at it, you have to be able to talk to people.
Right.
And I don't know, I can, as writers, all of those things, it's kind of, that's a lot,
It's a
when you have some.
unicorn set of skill sets.
Hmm.
We want a
Hmm.
lot of unicorns in a world with not a lot of unicorns.
That's the perfect way to put it.
um, okay, so before, well, not before, I guess. In addition, in between your let's call them your entertainment bookends, you did write quite a few books. My guess is 25. That's what my child says, because he keeps track of things like that. What made you switch from entertainment to writing?
Hmm. I don't know if it was ever a switch. So when I was agenting, I was always writing. Even when I was in the mailroom, when I was a trainee, when I was an agent, writing has always been my companion, probably since I was 8.
Hmm.
So that never really went away. What did happen is that sale of with the auction of Hollywood Girls Club, I was able to lean into the writing when the kids were little. It's about 25. There are a couple titles that I ghost wrote for celebrities, and there's also a pen name, so it's probably closer to 30 or
Hmm.
32. But
Oh, right. There is that. Yes. I forgot
yeah,
about all that.
yeah.
Yes. We were just talking about that the other day because an actress I know just hired a ghostwriter. And then we were all discussing what the ghostwriter had written before. And she was like, everything's covered by an NDA. So I just have to work on reputation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Which is a very interesting thing. How did you find ghostwriting? Because I did one project. We've discussed this. I found it difficult.
Yeah, I found it challenging as well. It was very different than my normal process,
Hmm.
so that made it hard for me, right? That I
Hmm.
tend to do very limited and basic outlines, if any, when I write, and because of the need for approvals on multiple
Right.
levels before I would proceed, there had to be a lot of outlining. And that
Oh,
kind of, it's like a balloon, it releases the air for
that
the,
it does. Well, for me, it
yeah.
does as well. I remember that because I had to send them to the agent to send them for approval. And they would come back with like tweaks on like the format or the order of things. And I was
Hmm.
like, okay, here we go. But that was back when I had to fly to interview somebody and record it. I can't believe I'm saying this, recorded on analog tape and then come back and then like listen to the tapes looking for the little nuggets that they wanted where they wanted them. That was a big project.
That sounds
And
like a big project.
I
Yeah.
don't know if I would do it again. But it was one of those zeitgeist sort of moments. Like it was a very big media moment, and so the book had to be out with one of the quick release thing they do when something
Hmm.
happens. So that was part of it as well. But I don't know if I do it again. Do you think you would do it again? Not that it would ever come up, though.
I don't know that I would do it again. I
It's
I
it's
think it would depend on the project, but probably not.
that's true. So what made you write romance?
That's an
Mhm.
interesting question. I had always read my mother's romance novels when I was a kid, and I absolutely loved them. I think much like when I started writing, it's when I started reading her romance books because she kept them all on the floor of her closet.
Mhm.
But I went through this phase when I was in college where I kind of turned my nose up at romance books,
Mhm.
and thought that I wasn't going to read them anymore. So the first two books in the Hollywood Girls Club series published, and they published about the time of the financial crash of 2008. And those
Okay.
books are very much about luxury and luxurious ladies living very privileged lives. And there
Okay.
weren't a lot of people who wanted to read them. So I got thrown into book jail with those books. And my agent at the time said, have you ever considered romance? Because she knew that I wrote fast, I was very prolific, and I wrote very quickly. And she said, I think that romance might be a fit for you. And I said, it's funny that you say that because I've always enjoyed reading romance. I just haven't done it in a long while. So
Mhm.
I proceeded to read, as we do as writers and attorneys, I proceeded to read like 100 romance books in varying tropes and genres to see, is this something that I would want to do or thought that I could do, and fell in love with that genre all over again. And so
Mhm.
decided that I would work on writing in romance. Yeah.
So, what made you write contemporaries? Because the more people I talk to, a lot of people started reading historicals because that's what whoever in their family
Mhm.
had, aunt, mother, grandmother, whatever, and really found that to be one of the most intriguing. I did not read them growing up, maybe because my grandmother had I guess contemporary Harlequins. Um, but what made you do contemporary? Because it is my preferred reading genre and writing genre, but I mean there's a whole world out there.
So I love to read historical, but I didn't want to have to follow all the rules that go with it,
Hmm.
right?
The
So
Reddit. Yes.
yes, yes. So I didn't like when I think of the really great historical writers, if you see them at a conference, they can give you details on the social etiquette rules and norms of whatever era of history they're writing. And I
Hmm.
thought to myself, even though I was a history major, I don't want to have to learn all that stuff before I begin to write. And this is the world I live in. So that was really the reason why I decided to move forward in contemporary. In retrospect, I probably could have also moved into paranormal because I and sci-fi because I love paranormal and sci-fi. Right? Those are
Hmm.
my
Oh,
favorites as
that's
well.
true. I
Mhm.
forget you do
Mhm.
like that in Star Wars and all these other
Mhm.
things. Yes.
Mhm. I love that. Um and that gives you even more freedom because you can create whatever rules you want
Yes,
in
that's
paranormal and
true.
sci-fi,
That,
right?
that's
Yeah.
true. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh wow. So, oh my goodness. But are the majority of your books set in Los Angeles?
That's funny that you asked that. I think that you're probably right. I think the majority of books are set in Los Angeles. Courting Trouble is set in Colorado.
That's true. I remember that I remember the cover.
I
Sorry.
I think
It's the winter cover.
right. I wonder if the rest of them are. Yes, I think you're right. I had never put
So
that
is
together.
is there a reason that you don't have books set in the Midwest? Because I'm thinking now for marketing purposes that would be great, and also you have that life experience.
It's interesting that you say that. I remember one time when I was driving to my in-laws' house from the airport, thinking about how a series set in kind of the Midwest would do well. I don't know that it was a conscious decision to write things set in LA and not to write things set in the Midwest. I think it
Mhm.
was more, again, this idea of it's easy to write what I'm surrounded by all the time.
Okay. That's
It
that's
felt
really interesting
easier. Mhm.
because somebody asked me that recently, and they also asked me why I don't write books about traveling, and I thought I don't have any answer on that. I 90% of my books are set in either Los Angeles or Cleveland, because I don't know why. Because it's easier. Then I've never written a book set in New York City. I don't know if I ever will. And I certainly don't write books that are ever set in Europe. It's just not something I'm interested in. But a lot of people do move around location wise. But
Mhm.
I don't think you have much either. And I do remember the Colorado book. Have you wanted to write books that are set in other locations?
You know, the it's so funny that you asked that. I don't know that I have. Like I've thought about a series set in Montecito, but that's California.
Hmm.
Um, there I did have as I was making that drive from the airport to my in-laws, the idea of setting something in kind of the Mississippi River Valley, the Mississippi River that
Hmm.
goes through the Midwest, because that could be interesting. Um, I've always had an idea for a series, but I've never felt like I quite had the chops for it to set in New Orleans because New Orleans is one of my favorite cities in the world.
Hmm. That's no,
Oftentimes for me, it's less about having the idea and more about having the time.
well, that's I think that is every writer's dilemma. I mean, I have a lot of ideas and apparently the
Right?
same 24 hours in a day that everybody else gets.
Hmm.
If I could just have a couple extra hours, I could write a lot of books. but but I don't. Do you Are you writing as much now? I mean, fiction wise, or has entertainment again eclipsed that?
It's completely eclipsed it. Yeah. So one of the things is that I really wanted to put the nonfiction title to bed, and I had
Hmm.
anticipated being able to release that the end of last year, and it just released this week. So
Hmm.
that gives you an idea of how much longer that took. I did, I think, go through a bit of burnout with the
Hmm.
fiction writing. I mean, you and I talked a lot about I had kind of a 5-year plan, and one of them was to become very prolific and to keep publishing in a rapid sort of way. And I went
Yes.
through a phase where I would go to my manuscript and I would go to open it on my computer and I would feel physically ill, right? Like
Oh.
it would make me feel really not good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a function of burnout. I am one of those writers who never believed in burnout until I went through burnout.
Well, you were writing a lot. I was amazed by you because you were writing rapidly, releasing rapidly, and writing like one book in the morning and editing a different book in the afternoon, which
Oh, that
my,
was really bad when I did that.
I,
That I
but I
felt like I
remember
was going
that.
to lose my mind. I think I even said that to you. I said, I think I can't do this. It's not sustainable.
No, but you did it for, I feel like a good couple of years. And well, let me say this. Well, would you do it again? Would you continue that if you were to go back to doing this, let's say full time or whatever, would you have that kind of pace?
I don't know. It's really interesting. I don't feel like it's necessary. I feel like at the time there was so much that I needed or felt like I needed to accomplish based on my author career, and I have
Mhm.
a really different perspective about that now. My writing has always done better when it didn't bear the weight of my life. I've
Mhm.
always enjoyed writing when I have something else that is helping to sustain myself and my family
Right.
financially. Um, so I don't know that I would write at that pace. Um,
But what
actually,
has
I think,
your shift
oh,
in
go ahead.
perspective on it?
Um,
Is it yeah.
I think it's internal. I think it's an internal job, right? Like this idea that I don't need that validation in quite the same way as
Mhm.
far as my
Okay.
writing is concerned, because
Mhm.
the writing is always there and it's something that I'm always going to do. For me, being a writer is part of my um, personal definition of who I am. I think this
Mm-hmm.
happened. Wasn't it you I texted when I was at a speakers conference and I said, I'm afraid they're going to take away my writer's card because
Yes, I
I'm
remember
here.
that.
I'm here as an entertainment attorney. And I
Right.
think it was you who said, what are you talking about? You've earned that. They can't ever take that
Yes.
away. Hmm.
No, it's not going to go away ever. It'll always be
Hmm.
there,
So there
forever and
was
ever.
that moment, right, where I was like, well, if I'm not putting out a book every 3 months or twice a year, then, somebody will look at me and say, well, you're not a writer. And then I realized, oh yeah, but I am always and forever. So
Yes, that one that has already been decided. That has already been decided.
yeah.
So
So go ahead.
so what are well, let me ask you this. I have, well, so many questions. Having had some, let's call it time and space to look back at all of the books that you've written, is
Hmm.
there a central theme or a core theme that you think stands out in them?
Yes. It's interesting that you say that or ask that. I love that question. So most of my heroines are damaged, and most of
Hmm.
that damage comes from childhood trauma or trauma that they're uncovering or things that they're dealing with, um, to try to move forward in their lives. Even the
Hmm.
first two titles that are women's fiction, um, that are each about four women who are friends and are trying to get movies made.
Hmm.
Those individual women have things that they're trying to heal within themselves to be able to move forward in their life.
And so I guess so again, the second question is the healing their independent, whatever, however they figure that out, or is part of it the hero seeing them or them being seen for the lovely people that they are despite the things that may have happened to them?
Well, in the titles that are true romance, it really is about the woman heals herself, in my opinion, but that relationship with the significant other allows the space and helps that person to heal.
Mm-hmm. So it becomes a little,
Hmm.
I guess, somewhat of a
Hmm.
reparative experience
Intertwined. Hmm.
with, yeah, with the romance. So then who are your heroes in those books then?
Do you mean what is their arc or who are they
Yes. Do they
individually?
Well, because if the women are, because the heroines that you described are fairly, I don't want to say fairly similar. I don't want to make it cookie cutter, but have
Hmm.
some one sort of theme. Then do you have a similar sort of theme among the heroes in your books?
It's funny. I was just thinking about the different ones that are present in the titles that I have.
Mm,
And in some of them, the heroes start out as kind of very alpha, not really understanding their or not being in touch with the part of themselves that interacts with the emotional part of themselves. So
mm-hmm,
I have some heroes like that, and then I have some that are more nurturing by
mm-hmm.
definition, and see the heroine, I think, for who she really is before she sees that. I was thinking about as you were talking to me, like in Hard Glamour, that guy is a complete jerk, and the hero is, or the heroine is this really lovely girl who really doesn't have anything at all. She comes from a really tough background and is virtually homeless. So there's that dynamic, and then I was thinking about one of the books has the trope of secret pregnancy and how
Hmm.
that's interesting. I also tend to love Friends to Lovers. It's one of my favorites to read, as
It's my
well as
absolute favorite.
yeah. And then I also adore Enemies to Lovers. I love to see it when two people finally acknowledge that one of the reasons they loathe each other is because there's this unspoken attraction that maybe they've been in denial about.
Oh my god. Okay, so can you? Okay, the number of people who like enemies to lovers, I don't think I get it. So okay. Whenever I read enemies to lovers, I usually end up hating one of the characters so much that I don't want the other person to end up with them. and then I'm very disappointed at the end because obviously it ends with them in love, and I'm always just so angry. Is there do you so what is it that you like? I just don't, oh my god, I just don't understand it. And I keep asking because I don't understand what it is that people like about it. Because I don't, are they truly enemies? Like that's the
So I don't know that they're truly enemies. So I feel like sometimes when I read that trope, and what I love about it is that it feels as though both characters are in denial about something about themselves. There's something that they're not acknowledging. And the person that is their quote unquote enemy, the other, their,
mhm.
their soon to be significant other,
Yes.
pings something within themselves. It's like a mirror. They're holding
Mhm.
up a mirror and they have to heal that. And when they do, when they start to really see their true self and see the other person, there's a there's something about that. I just love that. And I have to say, I'd like it reminds me a little bit. Did you ever watch the TV show Moonlighting?
Yes, yes. Yes, I love
Yes.
that show.
Yeah, so Good Enemies to Lovers reminds me a little bit of Moonlighting.
Okay, so yes, but that to me was a little bit more of like well, they were, well, obviously they had forced proximity, but there was more banter and less hate, I guess. I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I prefer more banter. We dislike each other
Right.
and less hate. Like there Yeah, yeah. No, when I think enemies to lovers, I think about it as more of a superficial sort of enemy, like we don't get along, versus
Uh
I've done something really horrible to
Awful to
you.
you. That's
Yes, yes.
yes, and
Maybe I
then
should
the
be more specific because there are other types of the enemies to lovers that's a little bit more extreme that I
mhm.
too have some challenges leaning into. Although, arguably, like say bully romance, it's a great place for people to explore a fantasy that they wouldn't necessarily explore in real life.
No, my first thought was bully romance, because one of because how I'm always I spent a lot of time trying to look at the redemptive arc to figure out if they have sufficiently redeemed themselves for this great love that
Mhm.
they're now going to be gifted.
Mhm.
And I don't, I think, always see the redemption. So I feel that the writers are very good in making the person distasteful, but then not
Mhm.
always very good at making the redeeming that sufficiently that I'm not really still upset with them in whatever horrible thing they may have done.
You're like, I have not forgiven this guy.
I
Why has she?
have not.
Why has
She.
she forgiven him? Yeah. Mhm.
And I have a, well, I think many of us, I, on my computer, I have like one of these romances I was going to write where he bullied her on social media. And I never could get to, well, but how is he going to be redeemed? Because the act itself was not great. And I know that there are many reasons that people engage in bad behavior and that maybe their own trauma and their own things that have happened to them.
Mhm.
But I don't, I struggle with the redemption. I really do. I really do. So I don't read that trope, but I do love friends to lovers because to me it's similar. The way you described enemies to lovers, it's similar. There's something, I love that acknowledgement or that realization that they have been ignoring,
Mhm.
sublimating, pushing away the one person who is really for them.
Mhm. I love that too.
It's just I can never get enough of it. Those are the 90% of the books that I have on the keeper shelf because I don't know, it gives me like some feeling. So when you're reading romance, what is the feeling that you're looking to have or from the book, from the experience?
Oh, yeah. So when I read romance, I think that it's really about being able to sink into a world.
Mhm.
It's escapism. It's identifying with the lead character. I mean, I don't need to identify with her 100%, but I need to understand her enough that I want to go on this journey
Mhm.
with her. Um, and then I think, like a lot of readers in romance, there is this very fulfilling sort of component about the happily ever after.
Mm-hmm.
It's great to know that at the end, and the other thing that happens is that I love it when it's a book where I get to a spot in the book and I'm like, how are they going to get them together? That you're like, this is insurmountable. I don't know how this author is going to work this out.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Um, right? And then they
Yes.
do, and you get that huge, wonderful feeling of, oh, look, they are together. Yeah.
No, I do. That's actually, I remember this as a child. That was always the point at which I could not be interrupted because people would be like,
Right?
"Do you want to go see Do?" And I was like, "I am at the big black moment. We're going to have the denouement. I cannot be talked to at this time.
Right. Leave me alone. Leave me
Leave me
alone. I
alone.
have to know what happens.
I have to know what happens." That was the only point I could not be interrupted, and I would give up
Mhm.
anything. You want to go to the mall? I do not want to go to the mall and buy clothes because now I'm going to find out this
All I
thing.
want to know is how these two people are going to end up together because I don't know what's going to happen.
Yes. So that is truly that is my favorite part of romance. So outside of romance, what else do you read?
Yeah, I really love paranormal. I really love spy thrillers for some reason. I
Okay.
love that. I love young adult. I also like I guess thrillers overall.
Hmm.
There's a pace in them that I enjoy. Um, right now, I'm reading a book series that has romance elements, but it
Hmm.
is definitely a paranormal that is set. Um, well, it's actually kind of a retelling of Macbeth.
Wow. Okay. That's
Yeah.
not.
And I'm really enjoying it. I'm really, really enjoying it. In fact, you know how when you're reading something and you're going through your day and you think about going back to the book the same way you would think about having a piece of chocolate?
Yes.
That's where I am with that book.
Okay.
And that doesn't happen all the time, right? And so when it does, or when the scenes that I saw in my head as I was reading the book pop up and call
Hmm.
to me, that's how I know that wow, this is something that I'm really enjoying.
So who are some of your favorite authors?
Well, you. You are one of my favorite authors. How's that? You are one of my favorite authors and have been for a long, long time. I love Julie Kenner. I love
Mhm.
Julia Kent. I love Sawyer Bennett. Marie Force is another one. Catherine Bybee, Jane Porter, you, um, Millie. Why am I blanking on Millie's last name? Is it Millie Taden? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't
Marina
pronounce.
Maddox, Celia
Mm.
Kyle, um, Claire Cook, obviously, but that series I've read decades ago, the Must Love Dogs series, and she keeps writing those.
Mhm.
Um, I could go on and on. Like there,
So that's yeah.
who there's this list would probably be shorter if you said who did you not like, but we would never do that.
No.
We never, yeah, you know.
No, that is so interesting because, well, I guess, okay, so I think my favorite authors are very different. But I think
Theodora Taylor.
mhm.
I'm sorry, I keep running
This
through
is so
people. Go
interesting
ahead.
because I like, I was thinking about like Sarah Mayberry or Serena Bowen, but mainly because they write these really emotional stories, like
Hmm.
really emotional. And I love to experience the gambit of emotion that is not my own. But you seem to like humor more because you mentioned a couple of people who do write humor.
I do love humor. I was trying to think about,
Although Theodora does write those really emotional things, I should not say that, but there's a lot of humor with the other one with other
well,
people.
I think Julie Kenner's are have angst, and Marie Force, her Fatal series has some true
Hmm.
angst in it. Jane Porter is not humorous. I have a penchant for,
No.
I mean, her recent books have more, I shouldn't say they're not humorous. They have a great level of depth, right?
Hmm. Yes.
With regards to the heroine.
Hmm.
Theodora's books, your books are, there is, a definite depth of emotion in all of that. I do love to read humor.
Hmm.
I don't feel like I write humor well, and so when I see someone who can write really good humor, I find
Hmm.
it I find it to be this skill that is almost like magic.
It's
I
fascinating
think
to read
I
because
think
I'm always like,
Pam
how
Dumont,
are they funny for
yeah,
300 pages? I can't be funny for 2 pages.
I think Pam Dumont is really good at writing humor.
Hmm.
Um, Jaina De Leon is good at writing humor.
That's true. That's true. No,
I'm
you're
like,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's
outside of
hard to
my,
write funny things.
I don't know how people do it. So I, I mean, I literally don't know. I read them and I'm laughing out loud and I think I could not do that. And I don't know what kind of brain does that, but I don't have it. Like that's, well, I have a lot of skills, but that's not on my list of skills I could do.
I always
Somebody,
wondered if you can learn how to do humor. I mean, if I had my wish, like if I could come back as something, I would want to come back as a stand-up comedian.
oh, we talk about this. I think about this.
Yeah.
I was thinking about so I've lived in Los Angeles like as long as you have, which is a long time. But
Mhm.
when we were all younger and had no children, a lot of my friends did sketch and stand up. And I wonder, I was thinking about it today because I was thinking about a writer on SNL. I wonder if that's just a muscle because when they work on those sketches like endlessly, does it become sort of second nature? Whereas I never had that kind of like brain workout
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
then you see the humor in a lot of things. Because if you talk to comedians or listen to comedians, most of them have I don't want to say a traumatic background, but a lot of them do, and so their go-to for dealing with it was often humor. So I just wonder if it's just a different way of looking at it, or if I had, I don't know, somehow signed up for the groundlings when everybody else did,
Mhm.
I would have had a different way of exercising those sorts
Mhm.
of issues. It's a thing I wonder often, especially
Yeah,
with friends who write comedy.
yeah. Yeah. No, I think that could be completely true that you might have a natural sort of ability towards something, but like a lot of things where you have a natural ability, you can learn how to make it bigger and better and do more with
Hmm.
it.
Hmm. So what is it that you like about stand-up comedy?
What do I love? You know what I like is that first of all, I love to laugh. Like laughter
Hmm.
for me is huge.
Hmm.
And then the second thing is with stand-up comedy is this idea that you can say anything to anyone if you can make them laugh,
That's true.
right?
That's
I
true.
love really smart stand-up comedy that also makes a commentary
Mhm,
about society or politics or I feel like laughter is the way to things that is
mhm,
not quite as threatening. It's an
mhm,
ability to have conversations about traumatic events or things that people disagree on.
mhm.
Um,
That's so interesting
yeah.
because I enjoy stand-up
Mhm.
comedy, but the longer I guess appreciate it, or the more that I hone down who I like, I think what I'm looking for in stand-up comedy is truth. And so most of the stand-up comedians now I listen to are I don't want to say like in the Richard Pryor vein. So they have some really sort of traumatic background, but they
Mhm.
make it absolutely hilarious. So you're both like laughing and crying at the same time.
Crying.
Yes. And
Absolutely.
I there's something about that I find quite cathartic. And kind of interesting, but I love the core of truth that's involved in stand-up comedy, and also I think actually a lot of fiction, which is maybe why I prefer women's fiction. I think I had to choose a favorite genre, it'd be that. It's that core or kernel of truth that comes through the story.
Mhm. Yeah,
Do
as
you
you were
also?
talking, Oh, go ahead. I'm
No,
sorry.
go ahead.
I was gonna say as we were talking, I was thinking about the different stand-ups and what it was that, I loved about them, and was thinking about, Ali Wong and Dave
That's my
Chappelle.
first thought too. Yes,
Mhm.
that's I was
Those
thinking
are
about
my
exactly
first
the same
2.
thing. Yes.
right?
Hmm.
And then who is the comedian out of Australia? Is it Hannah
That was Godspeed. I'm not going to be able to pronounce her last
Gadsby?
name, but
Mhm.
Gatsby. But that was
Mhm.
also those are the first two people that came to my mind. Her, the Hannah, because hers is so true. Like it was very.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't want to say bracing. That's not fair. But I watched it with like utter fascination. Like I couldn't like look away because it was so true. Um, but that was like a long form, and I do like the long form storytelling where you have to like
Mhm.
hear a whole thing, and then it's freaking hilarious. um Ali Wong is just straight up in your face, and I
All I
laugh.
want is
And
for her to, like, put out a special every week. Like, I love her so much. When this latest special came out, I kept saying to my family, "Where is her next one? Where is it? Why do we not have it?"
but I do laugh and cringe because part of it's like, oh, that's true, but I would never say it, or you know what I say? Like that's so very true, but also I would never say it out loud. And look at you, you just did that.
And that's what I think great comedians can do, right?
Just say,
And they
yeah,
can do it
say
in
the
a way
things,
that somebody's not gonna, like, well,
punch you.
recently, though, yeah. But you
Well,
know what
okay,
I'm right? Like,
yes, that
recently, maybe
aside.
not so much, but,
That should-
this whole idea that we all agree to laugh at whatever they say, no matter
Mhm.
how closely it might
It
impact
used
us.
to.
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, that's that's very true. So what okay, so let me discuss. So in my life, the arc of your let's career has been moving from entertainment to writing back to entertainment.
Mhm. Mhm.
How has it been? I don't want to say the re-entry because you never really left, but how has the full-fledged re-entry been in a world where the entertainment landscape has changed so much? If you had told me, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe during the last writer's strike, that it would change this much, I don't know if I would have believed it.
Do you know what's interesting is that while it has changed and grown, it hasn't changed completely. Um,
Mhm.
Meaning that the rules of engagement or the dance steps that I learned when I was an agent are still the dance
Mhm.
steps that apply.
Mhm.
So, so that has been really easy. And then the other thing that has happened is that so many of the people that I worked with when I was at the agency, they now have these really big, great jobs where they can
Mhm.
actually say yes to things. So
Right.
that's incredibly helpful as well. I think one of the hardest things for me was in the beginning going from being very sort of quiet with my stories and with my writer colleagues to pivoting and making those outgoing calls again
Mhm.
about other people's work. And it wasn't so much, I believed in the work, it was more about me transitioning into that sort of more front facing vocal person than I
Mhm.
had been for a while. Although some of my friends might say I was always that, I just maybe didn't realize it. Yeah.
I have no comment there. So So what is okay, so given the time that you've been here, what are your thoughts on the explosion of streaming and the number of outlets available to tell stories?
So I think that the market has never been so robust that way. There's never been so many buyers
Mhm.
um, in the market, and all of those buyers need content.
Yeah, they do.
But right, but the thing is that with that explosion, it goes back to what we were talking about before, where you still have to have the people who can run the show and develop the content so that
Right.
it will get on air.
Right.
So while the need is there, you still have a development process and you still
Mhm.
have a showrunner and you still have a writer. So those steps remain the same. And while there's not a shortage of books, there
Mhm.
can be a shortage of people who understand how to take something from one format and transition it to another format. Because
Yeah, the
when you
adaptations, yeah.
when you think about the process, I had this conversation recently. You're asking someone to take a book, which beloved bestseller or not, we all know that the statistics in America are horrifying. I read something that said that 75% of high school graduates never read another book in their lives,
I know, yes.
right? So
Hmm.
it's a fairly small pool, book readers, in
Right,
comparison to people who watch television and film.
right,
Because all of those people, I would say, or most of them, maybe 95% of them, still do watch TV and film. So you
right.
have to convert something that has a readership into something that is viable for all of those eyeballs. And
Hmm.
while the book is a great starting place, there still is um, a bridge it has to cross, and you have to find someone who knows how to shepherd it across that bridge.
That yes, that remains it remains the a quandary because those are two different forms, and I think there has to be a level of acceptance that they are different. The storytelling is somewhat different.
Hmm.
Certainly episodically, it's certainly different, and making crossing that bridge. What have you? You know, one of the things that people ask me all the time, and this is probably when you come up, they always want to know whether they should adapt their own book into a screenplay. It's the
Hmm.
oddest question I get the most often, and one to which I actually never have an answer. I usually look at people and go, "Really? That's that's what you're thinking?" But how do you feel about that? Because it's a question I get so often.
Yeah, when I was first agenting, I would have said to clients who ask that question, don't do that. That you don't
Hmm.
want to do that. Now I say, well, if you want to, why not? Because there are so many more buyers. But I say that with the caveat that um, I don't think that you can do the adaptation with the expectation that the buyer will want your adaptation,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because they may not. You and I both know that if J.J. Abrams wants to buy a book and he wants Aaron Sorkin to do the adaptation, and the author, unless the author is Stephen King, has done their
Right.
own adaptation, Aaron
Right.
Sorkin is going to get to do that adaptation, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Um, so, and the other thing, and I mentioned this in the book that just came out, Books to Film and TV, this idea of doing your own adaptation. Here's the other thing that I think authors should be really aware of is that as much time as any author spends learning their craft to write a good book, a
Mm-hmm.
screenplay writer has done as much time, if not more, to write a
Right.
good screenplay. So if you want to become a screenplay writer and you are willing to put in the hours and the dedication that's necessary to learn that additional craft,
Mm-hmm.
then absolutely. But I don't think that you can automatically assume that just because you wrote the book, your adaptation is going to be a good adaptation.
I do wonder how far people get in that because screenplays are so specific, and
Hmm.
I've never quite understood. They're just so specific. As a way, books to me seem far more diverse and have far more latitude, and screenplays to me don't seem to have that latitude. Every so often, I
So,
see one or come across one that you're like, "Wow, okay, they managed to push the genre and still stay within genre boundaries," but it's
mhm.
rare.
So there are definitely authors who are really good at adaptations, and I've read some of those screenplays, and it's
Mm,
really amazing. But
mhm,
not everybody can make that jump from one format to another. And also the other thing you have to think about is, so when you write a book, there's the cost to produce the book.
right.
When you produce an episode of TV, that
Mhm.
screenplay has to bear the weight of the $5 million per episode.
Also that. Also
Right?
that.
And the
Right.
fact that you have to satisfy the needs of the executives, the distributor, the director, the showrunner, if it's a episodic,
Right.
the executives, the other EPs on the project, right? So books are really this very solitary, lovely space in which
Mhm.
to tell your story.
Right.
But when you make that transition into film and TV, that becomes a very collaborative, lots of cooks in the kitchen, a
Mhm.
huge
Mhm.
budget that has to be
Justified.
sustained, and it
Hmm.
has to be something that millions upon millions of people, it resonates with that audience,
Right.
right? So I'll give an example, which I think you and I've already talked about. Julia Quinn wrote a great series.
Right.
Bridgerton's, I love those books. Bridgerton's is not on TV the way it's on TV now without Shonda Rhimes
Hmm.
and her overall deal at Netflix, right? Like
Hmm.
the
Right.
budgets for those episodes
Yeah, I know.
are huge, right? And so
Hmm.
while the book series is tremendous and had sold, I don't know how many copies and had a huge fan base, they had to be adapted into a space that would sustain that kind of budget level, as well as bring in an audience that is probably 10 or 100 times greater than what
Right.
Julia's audience was for the book series.
Right.
And that is saying nothing about the book series because it's amazing, but
Hmm.
it is saying that there is a transition from one to the other that required someone like Shonda Rhimes and Shondaland to make that transition, to cross that bridge, to shepherd that project across that bridge.
So, given the landscape has changed, do you find that authors are more amenable to the changes necessary to get their books on film or TV? Because my recollection 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago is that a lot of authors I knew could not sometimes would not sell or could not handle that difference or that shift that's necessary to make their book into a different format, make the story
Hmm.
different. Do you think authors are more receptive to those changes or more understanding of those changes now?
And I don't know if they're more or less, but I do know that it's, I think, a very personal decision
Hmm.
to an author, but I think that it's one that they have to come to terms with, that the majority of deals that are negotiated in film and TV do not allow for the author. Well, the author, I've never seen an author get final cut approval. There are
No.
very few directors that do.
Right.
But I think it's a personal decision, and I think it's one that is a representative of authors, that I will turn to an author and say, this is the producer who wants to do it. There will be changes most likely to your title. And if an author says, I can't live with that, then they should not make that deal, right?
Okay. Hmm.
If they're afraid that the changes are going to be too extreme, or they don't, um, or that their readership will be really upset, then
Hmm.
they shouldn't make that deal. And I would never say never. There are always exceptions to every rule as far as what goes into production and how participatory the author can be. I do believe that a lot of authors, not a lot, but some authors get to be more participatory than others. And that
Yes.
really depends on the showrunner, or it depends on the producer on the project, but I still believe that that continues to be more of the exception than the rule.
Hmm. I think
And I think,
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
no,
Well, what
you
I've said to
please.
people lately is that if they can accept that that's a different story, I don't mean like completely, but it's just a different iteration. I think that's the best way to sort of go about it. So you wrote your book, and that's a silo, and it'll never change. But anything else creatively is just sort of a different product. And if you look at it that way, and have less feelings about it,
Mhm.
it may be an easier way to accept the differences.
One of the one
Also,
of
money helps.
the that's yeah, that's true. One of the things, I was at a conference one time and Nora Roberts was speaking, and she gave such a interesting perspective on that. She was talking about how people would say to her, "Oh, Nora, they ruined your book. When they made that MOW, they ruined that book." And she
Hmm.
said, "They didn't ruin my book. My book is right here. My book is
Right.
100% the same, great,
Hmm.
doing fine. They may have made a not so great movie,
Hmm.
but that's not my book."
Right.
I think that that's a really smart perspective from an
Hmm.
author standpoint. And that's the other thing, is that money greases all wheels. Because so if you, as an author, got an offer and you were having a conundrum or it was a conundrum for you about the changes that they would make,
Hmm.
and you declined it and said, "I'm sorry, I just can't do that." And then they came back to you with 10 times the amount they originally offered,
Right.
that might shift your
Help.
perspective. Hmm.
Yes. I've taken an hour, which is when I try to limit it to. But so I have one final question for you.
Hmm.
So, okay, you have a, how can we say this? A very broad perspective, having been here for a long time. What would your advice be to young creatives entering into either entertainment or writing?
Mm. So to enter into entertainment, I think it depends on what area of entertainment that you want to be in. If you want to be a
Hmm.
screenplay writer, then I think, look, there are a lot of screenplay writers I know now that actually spent time as an assistant in an agency.
Hmm.
If you can get in the door, because if you don't know anyone in town, then it gives you a perspective on how the
Right.
town works.
Hmm.
The other thing is that I think you have to continue to write things and keep moving forward. You can't expect that your one screenplay idea or your one screenplay that you wrote is going to get made. You have to keep improving your craft and keep creating new things.
Hmm.
Don't wait on that one thing to break through, because inevitably the one thing that you thought was going to break through might not be it, but the 10th thing that you maybe didn't think was going to sell will be the thing that
Right.
sold,
Right.
right? And then, did you ask me for authors as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So the thing about being an author, I can only speak from my own perspective. And, you and I have talked about this a couple of times. If you want to be an author who is prolific and sustains a career, I have become even more of a believer that if you find a series that is doing well, keep writing in that series until it doesn't do well any longer.
Hmm.
Yeah, don't jump around with every new sort of thought or
Trend.
idea that you have. Yeah,
Yes.
to try to do it that way. And then to be respectful of your inner voice with regards to your creativity. I mean, I think I went through a phase where I just said to her, "Look, we're just going to write and we're going to write and we're going to write." And she eventually sat down on the floor and said, "Oh, no, we're not. You know, we're not going to write fiction for a while. You've tired me out."
Hmm.
So there is definitely a need to feed that well and be respectful of what you're able to accomplish with fiction.
That's true. That's one of the hardest things. I think that's one of the hardest things, at least a lot of the authors we know run up against, because there's
Hmm.
such pressure to produce, and a lot of authors we know can write quickly, but that doesn't mean that the well won't run dry
Hmm.
or you won't burn out, or even the physical. We talk about like the sitting all day in the hands. I mean, there's a lot that gets taxed in these kinds of jobs.
Absolutely. And things like that that I know that when I was first starting out, I never thought of.
No, but sometimes I wish I was like, if somebody had said, focus or pick a lane or get up every 20 minutes and walk around,
Get some
whatever.
exercise.
Is that
Go get some
any of,
exercise. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
any of those things would have been really helpful advice 20 years ago. Super
Yeah.
helpful. But I do give that advice now because, I mean, I'm sure you know, Ella, you meet so many young, enthusiastic people, and you want to say, okay, meter it out.
Hmm.
you know, don't go balls to the wall all right away, because it may be difficult to sustain that for many years to come. So, with that said, those are all my questions. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And I will certainly link to your new book in the show notes. I'm so excited that you're doing the nonfiction.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah.
your invitation.
It'll be so good. So people can stop asking. But what about Maggie Marr? Now they have Maggie Marr. everybody, here's Maggie. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been A Time to Thrill with your host, Aime Austin. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you'll share, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It will help others to find and enjoy my conversations with brilliant creators. Also, please hit the subscribe or follow button on your podcast app. In addition to hosting this podcast, I am also the author of the Nicole Long series of legal thrillers. The first 2 books in the Nicole Long series are now live. You can download Outcry Witness and Major Crimes to your e-reader right now. I'm also the author of the Casey Court series of legal thrillers. These titles are available where other books are sold, your local library, and also an audiobook. You can also follow me on Instagram at ThrillerPod. You can find me on Facebook at Legal Thriller Author or A Time to Thrill. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back soon with more great conversations.